citizens. Russian citizens have to go to third countries to receive permission to enter the US, and the result is not guaranteed, and the people cannot receive money for the service if they receive rejection. So there is a literal hunt by the American law enforcement and intelligence service for our citizens. And there is a fraud scheme of luring out Russian citizens to abroad if the US authorities have any claims to them, political claims. They can be qualified in a different way. They're not speaking publicly about it. So how is it happening? They send invitations with some beneficial commercial or tourist offers. After that, the people that were targeted are detained, and then they're extradited to the American jurisdiction according to the extradition agreements. And there is a full list of countries that cooperate with the US regarding the extradition. It will be on our website. That is why we urge during the celebrations and in the future to refrain from any trips to the US or any allied satellite states, first of all Canada, and countries of the EU, with some exceptions, if it isn't an emergency, of course, because people can become victims of provocations, can be detained if they violate national laws. And if there are signs of specific interests, with the invitations with offers to meet, to speak, as it was formulated, as the Russians said, that ended up in prisons. They were invited to speak about cooperations, about work for generous remuneration. First of all, we need to remember the examples of those cases when for many years we were fighting for our citizens to liberate them. They went to the US to have negotiations on beneficial, as some US representatives said, beneficial contracts. So we need to know all the risks. If the attention shown to Russian citizens by Americans becomes suspicious and there is too much of attention, maybe it's high time to stop these contacts, to reconsider the plans of your trip. We always confirm that the diplomatic and consular facilities of Russian Federation in the US and other countries will provide maximum help to protect the rights of our compatriots that find themselves in a difficult situation. But in today's situation, seeing the convulsive actions of the Biden regime that keeps staying in the White House, I have to stress that we need to know all the risks and to avoid tragic incidents when the American punitive justice machine does not leave any chances for fair trial, churning out staggering imprisonment of 15, 25 years. That is why we need to weigh the risks of going abroad. But this does not go for the friendly countries of our country. Let's turn to Ukraine. Ukrainians do not stop terror against the civilians of our country or in their own population. They conduct civilians. They conduct artillery shellings. They use combat drones against civilians. Since the 5th to the 10th of December, Russian air defense forces and land warfare forces shot down 200 UAVs. Marine aviation destroyed 8 Ukrainian unmanned motorboats in Black Sea. On the 6th of December, there was a suicide drone attack against humanitarian aid distribution points in the city of Aloshka in Kherson region. 3 civilians were dead, 3 injured. On the 8th of December in Gorlovka, there was an explosive weapons dropped and 8 civilians were injured. And Belgorod region, the terrorists used 140 munitions and 187 UAVs. 12 civilians were injured, and all the perpetrators of these atrocities of Kiev regime will be responsible. According to the arguments and the evidence gathered by the investigative committee of Russia, the sentences are being passed to Ukrainian neo-Nazis for their crimes. 24 and 0.5 years were given of imprisonment were given in absentia to the militants of Azov unit of UAF, to Andrei Romashenko, Igor Ivanuk, for killing 2 civilians in Mariupol. They are declared internationally wanted. 24 years of imprisonment is the sentence of Denis Khmelevsky, another bandit from Azov, for giving an order to kill 2 civilians in Mariupol in March 2022. 14 years is the sentence of mercenaries from Venezuela, Urbina Palma Vahari Moises from Georgia, Georgia Khalai, Carlos Rusatashvili, 18 years of imprisonment to Laudo Gamsakhudya, 20 years, citizen of Kazakhstan, Jasulan Desumbin, and the last one distinguished himself because he was disseminating the urges to commit acts of violence against Russians, and on YouTube he provided false information about the acts of Russian armed forces in Mariupol, Bucha and Volnovakha. 24 years of imprisonment is the sentence of 9 terrorists of UAF, Andrei Shestak, Nazary Morozov, Yavorsky, Shulga, Yampolsky, Kolbasin, Shalar, Penzin, Romanuk. In March 2022, they used a multiple rocket launcher to shell residential buildings in the village of Stary Krim in Mariupol region. We have ended the investigation against American mercenary Derek Bales, he is internationally wanted, and he is accused of terrorist act against Kursk region. There was also initiated a criminal prosecution against Pavlo Rozlach, colonel of UAF, who participated in the shelling of Kursk region with cluster munitions. At least 20 people were injured. Law enforcement organs of Russia will continue to bring to justice Ukraine Nazis and foreign mercenaries for military and other types. German politicians must remember. Seeing that there is no internal consensus inside the US about the amount of money they want to spend on their Ukrainian puppet Zelensky, well, that is why they decided to start stealing money. On the 8th of December, there was a decision made by the Kiev regime about receiving by Kiev a 40-year loan for 20 billion USD in the context of a G7 initiative by providing to the Zelensky regime of 50 billion US dollars from the frozen Russian assets. Well, according to all these wordings, but in fact, all these wordings just mean that they're stealing money. This is an outright theft of Russian money. They're trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, to help Ukraine, but not forget about their own benefit. This deal, by the request of the Americans, will be presented as an agreement that is implemented by concluding a certificate purchase agreement between Ukraine as a borrower, Federal Financing Bank, and USAID, as well as agreement on guarantees and repayment between Ukraine and USAID, and issuing by Ukraine by the Minister of Finance of Ukraine of a debt certificate to the Federal Reserve System that is guaranteed by the USAID. The amount of the loan bears interest at a rate of 1.3% per annum, plus the current average rate on annual U.S. Treasury bills, and is repayable from the proceeds of the frozen Russian assets. Any reasonable man understands that we see that this is the policy of banditism and theft that has become public policy of the U.S., because the U.S. has no its own money to help Ukrainian neo-Nazis. So in the future, we are going to see gangster tricks that they are going to use. They were very widely practiced in America before, and it seems they haven't forgotten them. This is what we call corruption, theft, stealing, the link between the public governance of the U.S., the creation of an international cartel to receive money. So this is, in fact, a terrible situation. But in fact, Washington said that it was fighting against it. But we see terrible black schemes to use the money that was stolen. So another question is reducing the mobilization age in Ukraine. The topic of reducing is very important.
It's a killing for the Ukrainian people, and it is done. I mean, those statements by Bankova, by the Kiev regime, they are done under the pressure, under the pressure of the outgoing administration of Biden, because it is Washington who insists that decreasing the mobilization age in Ukraine should be done according to a 18-year-old scheme. In exchange to the American aid, it's not just corruption scheme, it's a bloody scheme. The lives, the Americans, they like some names for their campaigns. Money in exchange for life. This proposal Washington insists on. The U.S. State Department representative, with some cynicism, said that in case of recruiting young Ukrainians, Washington will care about their full equipment. Matthew. I now address Matthew Miller. Why didn't the Department of State precise that by the word equipment they meant and included also the burial? As the Ukrainian media report, the analysis has shown that young people aged between 18 and 25 are up to 80% prone to desertion, and from over 300,000 new recruits, about 240,000 will desert. So they are aware what the White House is preparing for them, disguised as equipment. They're just preparing their coffins. So, it's a direct quote of Zelensky. The priority of the West should be missile supplies and decreasing the military potential of Russia, and not decreasing the mobilization age in Ukraine. But before this, what has he done? He was decreasing that military age. Now it's an attempt to wash away from him the traces of blood. Zelensky, as no one, is interested in the continuation of hostilities, and that will inevitably lead to the end of his regime. And he will do his best for that not to happen in the foreseeable future. And as the head of that junta, he will not stop. He will make any sacrifice. He has already sacrificed the Ukrainian people. Decreasing the mobilization age in Ukraine is the issue of time, a matter of time, as everyone understands. So they have offered some money in exchange for the lives of Ukrainian citizens. Even now, the Ukrainian consulates in many cases refuse to issue foreign passports to young Ukrainians aged under 18. And all that is done against the background of the Western countries, primarily the European Union countries, refusing the Ukrainian citizens in the implementation of programs for their social, economic adaptation on their own territories. It is a testimony that the West has decided to literally force away the citizens of Ukraine on its territories and not to issue foreign passports to the Ukrainians abroad, not to prolong the foreign passports for them. And on the other hand, to make unimplementable the programs of their support in Western countries where they have lived for all the time. But in humanity in Ukraine, it's in all areas. Just have a look on the 5th of December, on the Alley of Glory in the center of Kiev. The bus of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War, Sidor Kovpak and Ivan Chernyakhovsky, Pavel Rybalko and Alexei Fedorov were dismantled. On the 8th of December in Pavlograd, JS-2 tank was dismantled that was developed by the native of that very city, Joseph Kotin. It was a response to fascist tigers and panthers. It was the monument created by local citizens, local residents. Such boorish methods are used by the Zelensky regime to just glorify Nazi Germany and to cross out the memory of the Ukrainian citizens who fought the Nazis. They can make any statements, but these are facts that cannot be crossed out of history. Now about UNESCO. Just have a look how many monuments have been dismantled. Some of them were under UNESCO protection as special cultural values. So what about UNESCO? On the 4th of December, the Odessa City Council, under the pressure of the neo-Nazis, supported the dismantlement of the monuments connected with Russian culture, including the monument to famous local residents. It was the monument to Alexander Pushkin, erected in 1889 for the money of local residents. That Pushkin monument, it has survived everything. It has survived 2 world wars, revolution, change of power, repeated change of power, ideological fluctuations. It has also survived. It has not survived the neo-Nazi Zelensky regime. In October, it was reported that on the initiative of the Odessa cultural officials, they addressed UNESCO, they addressed Zelensky with a request not to destroy the historical image of Odessa. It has no relation to their sympathies or lack of sympathies towards our country. And some people who joined them from Great Britain, from the United States, from France. They have not demonstrated any love for us as a state, as a nation. But the barbaric actions of the Zelensky regime, they were horrifying even for them. In a request addressed to UNESCO Director Azoulay, it was sent to the UN Human Rights Council. So it's her direct responsibility of Madame Azoulay. But it does not do anything. This authoritative structure, it's just shamefully keeping silent. So on the 6th of December, in the Italian media Domani, there was an article published that is named Meloni, its Italian Prime Minister. We will rebuild Odessa. Quote of the Italian Prime Minister, who has promised to help this city. So the heading, as Meloni said, we will rebuild Odessa. A year later, the city has not received a single euro. So it's the name of the article in the Italian newspaper. This article says that as of November, in the Italian, as they call it, laboratory to reconstruct Odessa, until by 2027, they have planned 45 million euro, and Odessa has received just 70,000 euros. And those 70,000 euros have been provided by UNESCO. So of 45 million euros minus 70,000 euros, a huge sum remains. Where are more than 44 million euros? It's a question that not only me, but the Italian journalists want to ask, and they ask that the reconstruction of the Transfiguration Cathedral that was damaged in 2023 by the Ukrainians. The local priest Miroslav had to collect money himself for the restoration of the cathedral. So maybe something happens in the remaining 2 years, because the budget is up to 2026. But those volumes of theft, of deceiving, are just fantastical. So people are addressing an organization. People from different countries, they write letters addressed to UNESCO Director General Azoulay. They also address other UN structures. There is no reaction. And it's strange, actually, that in order to see with the current system of mass communication, the demolition of monuments protected by UNESCO, there is no necessity to write letters. It's open information disseminated by all the news agencies, TV programs, media outlets. It's the task of UNESCO to monitor the condition of those sites. And letters, they can be just written for something unnoticed. And they do not say that people of different nations fought in that war, and they fought against those who divided people in accordance with their nationality. It's just absurd. What is happening? They have just shown some African Ukrainian who does not know the history of some Babi Yar. What is Nazism and fascism that considered that people of different race are not people? Just they should have studied some school book before telling all that. And the Americans do similar things in other parts of the world. A memorable ceremony for the tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki took place in Japan. What do we hear? Condolences to the victims of the catastrophe, but no statements about who has committed those atrocities. It's the Kiev regime who is trying to ban any possibility of for the young people to think for themselves. So they are just taught in accordance with the Nazi ideas by the Zelensky regime. It's another confirmation of the relevance of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and elimination of threats from its territory. And all those targets will be fulfilled, as the Russian authorities have repeatedly stated.
We have seen information in the media, circulating in the media about anti-personnel mines provided to Kiev. Mostly civilians suffer from them, including children. These steps that were taken by the American side on the background of the 5th review conference that was held in Cambodia from the 25th to the 29th of November of the convention on the prohibition of the use, stockpiling, production and transfer of anti-personnel mines and on their destruction, or Ottawa Convention. Well, all these steps are a shining example of hypocrisy and the policy of double standards of Washington regarding different international legal instruments, including Ottawa Convention. Let's see. In 2022, the President of the US, Joe Biden, officially said that there is a significant change in American policy regarding anti-personnel mines. In particular, they were going to take necessary efforts for countries joining Ottawa Convention and refuse the transferring and using by Washington of these weapons in all the regions of the world, with the exception of Korean Peninsula, as it was stated. Such a hasty shift away from the statements of the US President describes Washington as an unreliable player on the international arena that makes inconsistent steps. With their actions, the U.S. encourage violations by Kiev of their violations of Ottawa Conventions. Ukraine participates in this document since 2005. Russian law enforcement structures regularly register and document all the cases of the use of anti-personnel mines by Kiev regime against facilities and people. Since 2022, only in the Donetsk People's Republic, there were 176 cases of civilian casualties because of the high explosive anti-personnel mines Leopard stock. Ukraine also widely uses high explosive mines PMN2, directional fragmentation mines MON50 and PVP50. We point out a dangerous trend to review under the pretext of a changed situation their position on the Ottawa Convention by other countries of the West, including Latvia, Estonia and Finland, that are saying openly that they want to withdraw from this international treaty. Remember what they said before. They were so emotional in the international organization, proving that anti-personnel mines are so inhumane. And where is your humanity? Such actions are fraught with undermining international legal system in the sphere of controlling armaments, disarmament, non-proliferation, degradation of situation in the sphere of security in Europe. I cannot but answer to the questions that we received because of the words and statements of President-elect Trump about the peace in Ukraine. Well, after a brief meeting with Zelensky on the 7th of December in Paris, in presence of Emmanuel Macron, he appealed to the President of Russia, Mr. Putin, urging to cease fire immediately and to start peaceful negotiations. In social networks, he said, "Time to act," but there were no specific proposals or ideas. And nothing was said about the key to that, the readiness of Kiev for such negotiations. Well, we have received many questions about this, so that is what I would like to say. If someone expects that Russia will make some kind of concessions, well, obviously, these people do not know very well the situation. Maybe they have very short memory. Well, let's remind them. Well, it is impossible to forget that it was our country that showed goodwill to reach mutually acceptable agreements to settle Ukrainian crisis. For instance, in February 2015, when the complex of measures to implement Minsk agreements was signed. And before that, Russia initiated the Minsk agreements in 2014. And in March 2022 in Istanbul, during another round of Russian-Ukrainian negotiations, there was a prospect to reach a peaceful agreement. We shouldn't forget about that either. But every time, Kiev regime and its Western supervisors would undermine implementation of these agreements. And after that, the jewel on this, in this whole situation, would be that Zelensky signed a document, signed under the pressure of the US, banning any negotiations with Russia. The reaction of Zelensky was left without any reaction there in the US. The president of Ukraine that has lost its legitimacy long ago answered to the words of Donald Trump with a cynical rejection, saying once again that he will not sign any peaceful agreement without any guarantees for security, which, as he understands, is the membership of the country in NATO. So it means that achieving peace is not a priority for Kiev regime. They are not thinking with such categories. They are not using them, because this is what they were taught. By whom? By Biden regime, by the US administration. Because during the years they were teaching them to implement provocations, to ignore international law, to be aggressive. Literally, what we see, this is a description of the instincts that were opened and they were described by Pavlov. For more aggression, for more violations of the rights, for more provocations, Kiev regime received more rewards from the White House. Well, this is just it. The Kiev regime thinks with the categories of war. They want to implement their peaceful plan. After that, they turn to the so-called victory plans. And there was another plan. I'm not going to give you the name because there was some kind of other plan. But in fact, they're escalating the conflict to receive more finances, to receive more weapons. But the US prefers to be silent about that. And in vain, because according to the Ukrainian press, Andrei Yermak, that visited Washington last week, he asked the future American administration to help Kiev to return the territories according to the borders of 2022 and to become part of NATO. This is one of the most terrible historical tragedies that has ever happened with people all over the world, and that is what is happening in Ukraine. This terrible, false words that are being said by Zelensky that was just bought by external powers. And all this happens against the background of bountiful supplies of weapons and military equipment by Pentagon to the AFU, providing weapons for almost for the whole 2025. Another idea of inflicting strategic defeat to Russia is still on the agenda. Who is not interested in peace? Who rejects it? Who bans it legally? Who uses aggressive, inhumane rhetoric, xenophobic rhetoric? This is the Kiev regime using US money. If Washington really wanted to end the conflict, they would immediately make their Kiev puppets withdraw their forces from the territory of 4 new regions of the Russian Federation. It would allow, as President Putin said on the 14th of June in the Foreign Ministry, to start negotiations, of course, after Mr. Zelensky cancels his own decree that bans any negotiations with the Russian leadership. We are speaking, of course, about possibility to start negotiations about non-bloc neutral, non-nuclear status of Ukraine, its denazification and demilitarization. The implementation of the specific offers formulated by a Russian president would end the conflict, reach a comprehensive, long-term, just solution on the basis of strict reciprocity based on our national interests. It means taking into account the realities on the ground when we form new geopolitical configuration after the special military operation, protecting the interests of the Russian Federation, and it excludes any intervention by third countries. We receive many questions regularly after every message from Washington, from the team that is being formed by Donald Trump. There are such questions as if we're ready to have contacts with Donald Trump, with his team. Of course we are ready in the context of settling Ukrainian crisis. But as for any serious working variants that would ensure the protection of rights of Russian-speaking people and that would reduce our concerns, we haven't received anything. And as for what Mr. Lavrov said in many different interviews to Russian and foreign journalists, and he spoke in detail about Russian vision of the situation. This is not only our vision. This is the vision that will lead to real settlement of this crisis. Well, if we're speaking about governance incompetence, this is what's happening in Moldova. The Speaker of Parliament, Igor Grosso, and Foreign Minister Mikhail Popshoy spent in the US whole week, and they were complaining to their supervisors that Moscow was trying to return instability and chaos to Moldova. And this is the end of quote. We have to react to such groundless insinuations. If they allow themselves to say something like that, well, we have to do it. We need to see social economic indicators of Moldova over the years that Maria Zakharova was the president, that they themselves brought their country to the edge of the abyss. They started the chaos, they started the instability. The economy fully depends on external loans. And this rose in the internal, increased the internal emission and the growth of the public debt. And in the 3 months, in the annual terms, it increased by 70%. As experts say with bitter irony, the indicators of employment, falling birth rate and population outflow only grow faster than the anti-rating of Moldovan authorities. There is no clear strategy to solve the situation, and it is symptomatic that the government of the country asked the parliament the permission to introduce emergency since the 16th of December in the sphere of energy. And this is not the first time For 2 years, they had an emergency situation since February 2022 to December 2023, and the residents of this republic remember what were the results. Lawlessness, extrajudicial executions of political opponents, the closure of undesirable media, and this is the game with the security of the republic. And there is information in the media of Moldova about the plans of Romanian company Rheinmetall Automechanica, a subsidiary of a German defense conglomerate, to invest in the restoring machine building in Moldova. But the main activity of this conglomerate is maintenance and repair of armored vehicles produced in Germany and the UK in the interests of the Ukrainian armed forces. That is why we understand what these investments are going to be used for. Well, the West knows how to count money and to make others do their dirty and dangerous job, and that is what they're doing now in Moldova. In the end of November in Chisinau, there was a conference on security, and Yanis Mazeiks, the permanent representative to the EU of the country, boasted that the support of armed forces of Moldova by the EU since 2021 to 2024 it was amounted to 137 million euros. So this is the second amount after Ukraine. But what are they used for? And he also stressed that Brussels is going to continue to do it in the same spirit. But what for? Until Moldova is turned into a full-fledged participant of the Ukrainian conflict. Until they reach the citizens of Moldova when there are no Ukrainian citizens left. And have they asked Moldavian citizens? We're sure that no one has ever asked them, because we know their answer. They do not need it. According to the polls, 55% of Moldavians are sure that their government is going in a wrong track. Another agreement of partnership about defense and security with London was signed. This is only for ensuring cybersecurity to, first of all, block opposition and Russian-speaking internet resources, and the British are ready to provide £2 million for that. The same documents were signed with Norway and Sweden. So this is another vicious track that they are following, that according to to do what the West says. And we know what is done in Washington and Brussels and London. They use their resources, lead the situation towards chaos, and after that they propose to the country that receives the help to solve their problems themselves. Just see what happened in Ukraine. And when their wards cannot do it, cannot solve their problems because of the Western policy, they can be blamed for everything. And the West is never to blame. And then they just replace this country with someone else. They find another champion of democracy. And Chisinau has to remember it before declaring themselves part of the so-called rules-based order. But there is just one rule. The West destroys, brings chaos, we see that there are so many black holes opening everywhere, and countries fall into their, sometimes they're not, well, and very often innocent people suffer from it. Well, let's turn to Bulgaria. By order of Bulgarian authorities, monument to Soviet army in Sofia was demolished. They were speaking about some urgent restoration, but it was a lie. They cut into parts the figures of Soviet soldier, Bulgarian worker, and a mother with a child, and it was just used for scrap metal. It was 70 years next year. It was a grandiose, monumental sculptural composition that was built by sculptors and architects of Bulgaria. And where did they find the money? These were donations of working people. And this sculpture was opened in 1954 in the honor of the great victory over fascism. This is sacrilege against the victory, against the memory of heroes, against those who honored the history and the memory and donated money for this monument against their own people in Bulgaria. Until recently, people would come in masses to this memorial, they would bring flowers, veterans would come, the heroes of Bulgaria, who preserved the memory about those times, people who appreciated, who thanked their compatriots for liberating Europe from brown plague, who thanked Russian Soviet army for liberating Bulgaria. The demolition of the monument was one of the most shameful steps of the hybrid war against Russia. Not just against hybrid war against Russia, but against civilization, against humanity, against truth. It is part of propaganda campaign to denigrate the role of our country in Bulgarian history, to weaken the mutual sympathy of the peoples of both countries. But we continue speaking to ordinary Bulgarians, common Bulgarians, sensible political public associations, and we know that the vast majority of Bulgarians do not support such actions of the authorities and want to preserve friendly relations with our country. They just want to preserve their own history. We are inextricably linked by eternal values, aspiration to true freedom, patriotism, anti-fascism, and we are sure that the truth and justice about the warriors and liberators will prevail sooner or later, because the loss of historical memory is the end of history, and there can be no future without history.
So, about fakes. Anti-Russian campaign in Great Britain. In the annual review of National Cybersecurity Center, voiced by Great Britain, accusations against Russia of hostile actions in information and communications technology sphere. There are no arguments that could justify those accusations and those threats allegedly posed by our country. They are just expressed due to political situation, and it's expressed by the media themselves. It's part of Russophobic campaign in order to create a favorable political background. London is well aware that starting from the 9th of May this year, within the framework of the UN, the global roster of contact points to exchange information on computer attacks is operating. And Great Britain, as its participant, has not sent us any requests via this channel. So it testifies that they have no proof of Russia being engaged in those hostile actions. They do not have, Great Britain does not have any proof of that, so they just prefer the highly likely concept, megaphone diplomacy, and they ignore professional interaction, normal conversation between competent authorities. We have proposed such formula, but it was not interesting for London. So they should not make those insinuations, but just be interested in the behavior of their puppets, because Zelensky openly claims organization of hacker attacks the IT army, so-called IT army controlled by Kiev. And American and British users, they will not make any difference. They just need hacked accounts, hacked sites in order to fill their pockets. They have already reached the Western Europe or Western European mass media. Correspondents that have become stars of a global media sphere. They speak different languages. They are just personalities, not just members of the team of professional heads of the media outlet. They are just actors, main actors, and they form that very agenda, and that is welcomed by the heads of the channel. It's just some new word in modern journalism, when each journalist and correspondent is stimulated by the directors of the media outlet for creative and autonomous work, not only as when performing some task, but developing their creative potential. And the channel is just constantly developing. It does not just keep abreast with the times, it's just ahead of the times, I think. It's forming some trends, forming the fashion in information sphere. And there is one more aspect I would like to mention with regard to RT. It has become the major target for so-called Western democracies, better to say Western quasi-democracies. And employees from the EU, Great Britain, the US and Canada, more than 110 sanctions have been imposed, blocking the broadcast, expulsions, harassments. They just face real prosecution and harassment, psychological pressure, physical intimidation. And that has been done by law enforcement structures of Western countries. But RT does not give up. It's just stimulating them for further work. They just regard it as a challenge. They think that it's, I think, just some impetus for the movement ahead. Despite those measures against RT, those measures that are of a very large scale, attempts to marginalize them, the trust of the public has not been lost, it's growing. The channel is demonstrating to the entire world what is a quality journalism, modern journalism, preserving the traditions. And this toxic environment created by the West, RT has accustomed to that. It has fought it by growing its information presence, just reorienting resources to countries that before have not been covered, just considering that as its own tasks, its own targets. Despite efforts by the West, it's successful, and the popularity of the channel is growing on all the continents. I congratulate all the team, congratulate my colleagues. Good luck to you, and we are not the only one. In our high estimations, on the 5th of December, in the Journalists Club of Mexico, there has been the 72nd ceremony of Journalism Awards, and the laureate was Elena Villar, with her work about Vieques Island, that has been a testing ground for the US weapons, different weapons, and the residents are living under constant threats of those mines and suffering from accumulation of heavy metals in their bodies. And The second prize was awarded to Eric Fonseki, The Dance of the Northern Lights. It's about the Kola Peninsula, amazing natural phenomenon. The prize has been awarded to Camila Lasana and for an interview with Sebastian Martinez, member of the Central General Staff Group in Colombia. And Maria Fernanda Padilla has been marked for her producer work. And there is also an interview with Marisa de las Nieves Delgado, the first woman who was born in Antarctic, and it was a reward for the journalist Sergio Pintado, representative of agency Sputnik Mundo. TV Bricks media network has also received an award, and its head, Shishkalova, head of the Latin America department. So it's the work of Russian journalists all over the world, despite any efforts to harm by the West. So it's just pleasant, and we're proud of our journalists and our correspondents. I would like to congratulate them and to thank them. There is one more date I would like to mention. On the 12th of December, it's 80-year anniversary of the establishment of relations between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Nicaragua. It was the act of goodwill in 1944. The victory of Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua in 1979 marked the beginning of the better quality stage in Russian-Nicaraguan ties. So in 2015, a public holiday was established in Nicaragua, the Day of Friendship between Russia and Nicaragua. It's a testimony of our respect and friendship. And representative of the President of Nicaragua for Russian affairs, Laureano Ortega, will visit our country on that occasion, and the relations develop constructively with dialogue also at the highest level, and the Intergovernmental Commission is operating. It has its sixth meeting today. On the relations are systematically strengthened. Partnership is developing in health, outer space, agriculture, peaceful atom, and removal of unfavorable governments. We also interact within the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Our relations have many bright pages. In very difficult situations, Moscow and Managua were together. We have undergone all challenges, and our relations have proved to be stronger than any difficulties. We have accumulated a lot of experience, a solid basis for bilateral relations. We congratulate our Nicaraguan friends and colleagues on this remarkable date. One more issue on historical falsifications. We have on multiple occasions drawn attention to falsifications in covering historical events and the important role of our country is just absurd and terrible in this context. The attempts not just to keep silent, but to denigrate the participation of our country during the Second World War. We just observe solemn processions of SS veterans, as they are called, in the countries who just call themselves bastions of civilization, but also the efforts of Ukrainian political figures inspired by their Western patrons to build their states on lies, xenophobia, boorish nationalism, and now the Russian army has to counter modern forms of Nazism that have become, as we have mentioned today, the basis of state ideology in Ukraine. We intend to fill the gaps in the memory of our former allies in the anti-Hitler coalition. With regard to the Second World War events, on the 22nd of June 1941, Europe captured by Hitler, and between the 6th of June 1944, it's the actions of our allies in Normandy. It was 3 years of fighting of the Red Army with Wehrmacht, with Nazi Germany. So that Nazi machine suffered a fatal blow that has resulted in the victory of Nazi Germany and the victory in that war. I would like today to remind the Ardennes operation that took place in Belgium from December 1944 to January 1945. It will be marked on a grand scale, its 80th anniversary, by the Western countries, with the exception of our country. As you know, we do not have any claims for someone else's events. But actually, these events are directly connected with our country, and I would like to mention that, to remind you of that. The breakthrough of tank and infantry parts of Wehrmacht began on 16th of December 1944 in Ardennes, led to American and British troops withdrawal up to 100 kilometers. Commander Dwight Eisenhower wrote to Washington that if the Soviet troops would not begin a major offensive, the Allied forces would find themselves in the most difficult situation. It was a threat of surrender of Strasbourg and Paris, so they had to address Moscow. On the 6th of January 1945, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, sent a message to Joseph Stalin asking to activate the offensive of the Red Army on the Western Front in order to attract a considerable part of Hitler troops that were on the Western Front. So the heads of the US and Great Britain, before they had not agreed their plans with Moscow, but now they had to. So our commanders moved the dates of the offensive to the beginning of 1945, despite the unfavorable weather conditions that limited the use of aviation. Our troops just smashed Hitlerites. They moved